So, Sarah, we have established that culture is changing because the world is changing. And we've created a project called CultureOS, which means the operating system of culture in modern day organizations. Most organizations treat culture like a sort of a noun, but we're seeing it as a verb, a living system. How are you seeing what CultureOS is and what it ultimately does and empowers?
hmm Maybe, Alex, I can start with where I think some companies get this wrong. I have seen a lot of companies over my years put up, great posters, get a lot of vibe, get a lot of energy around culture. Um, and inevitably that tends to work well for a while, if it works at all. But then, slides away when things like behavior, stories that are told in the company, incentive structures, um, just signals, if you like, in the company, don't reinforce, what the printed version of the culture is. And when that happens, it affects how much people trust in the company, how they make decisions and how they perform and show up. And so I think, if that's if culture values posters vibing is not the way to go, I think what we think with Culture OS is it needs to be a bit more intentional, that culture should be designed. And it's a system level thing that if you don't have one element, the other three aren't going to perform as well. So we're thinking of it in sort of 4 or 5 different elements. So what we call inner OS, this is how our people show up, manage themselves, manage emotions, manage how they engage with an increasingly disruptive environment. How they collaborate with each other, how they trust each other, how information flows across the organization. Um, what we call brand OS, so how do leaders show up, what kind of stories, symbols, things are rewarded in the company. And then there's a couple of things that are sort of all encompassing. What's the company's purpose and how do they show up ethically, particularly with respect to AI? So in short, I think Culture OS for us needs to be a systems level view. It needs to be designed intentionally, and the intention needs to focus on at least 5 of those elements that I've just spoken of.
Wonderful. Anyone else want to weigh in on how they're seeing CultureOS?
Well, I think you pretty much covered it. I think if anything, it's just since we're moving so fast in this world, and you talk about system, so it's building that kind of blueprint, and also, of course, adaptive for that kind of environment, that industry, and so forth. So the whole idea is to kind of mold it together, but also adapted to the specific situation and the context. And as we all know, it's moving very fast. So to have that kind of system in place, since culture is so important, is really going to help the company, the leaders, everyone working inside the organization to feel some kind of maybe more security in a very uncertain, fast-moving world. So yeah, that's how I see it anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that it usually tends to fall apart or crack when management don't live up to the nice words and all that good vibe that they're sending, but then doing something totally different, and then it just falls apart quite quickly, actually. So not only talking the talk, but walking the walk from management is crucial.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but I think particularly our Gen Zs, Carl, are very sensitive to when leaders don't do what you just said, right? Walking the talk. Um, some may view that as them being a more cynical generation. Actually, in my honest opinion, they're just calling out what they're seeing is you say this, so therefore my expectation is that you do this. And yeah, when it doesn't line up, as you say, things can come tumbling down. Interesting this week, Nestle CEO in seat for less than a year, removed for behavioral transgressions. Tough decision for Nestle, one of the world's largest companies, most complex companies, but very clear red line around what is acceptable behavior or not. So that would be a good example, I think, of a company actually walking the talk around their ethics and values.
Yes.
So, Alex, I'm going to throw this one over to you because I think experimentation is really at the heart of a lot of, how you live your life and how you run your business. Why do you think experimentation is such a fundamental part of CultureOS?
Well, firstly, I think it all begins at a truism that every single human being wrestles with on the planet, whether this was, humans 200,000 years ago, or whether if, you're in the center of London or New York. And that is that we have an innate resistance to change. We don't like things that feel uncertain or risky. And it drives our behavior. It drives the decisions we make and the things that we do, the people we trust. As organizations get bigger, they become more successful. They naturally need to take on the hierarchical systems to help reduce the cost of change, reduce the cost of uncertainty as they keep on, growing their market share. And that's normal. That's what they need to do. At the same time, it comes with a very real price that I don't think many leaders and leaders in these organizations are always aware of, which is that fear of uncertainty, and it grows as a kind of enormous irrational fear, because our fear of uncertainty drives our fear of experimentation and curiosity. The more that we want to move away from things that don't seem clear or that are out of our control, means that we're less likely to want to try and understand them, try and understand what is at the root of them. So we need to put ourselves in an environment where outcomes can't be controlled. And that's hard. That's difficult to manage if you don't have the kind of guidance, the kind of careful facilitation and process of keeping that whole interaction focused and disciplined, and also safe at a psychological level. So a lot of organizations end up just stopping at the mission statement and the Fun Fridays level, where they can talk the talk, like Carl said, but not necessarily walk the walk of what real change requires, because it means putting yourself in that stage where now I need to behave as though I can't, necessarily trust my assumptions. I've got to look at these problems differently. And that inadvertently, I think, puts a lot of organizations really at risk, bigger risk than they might like to admit, because the world outside continues to change. Everything continues to be on its own exponential curve, but we're ignoring the change internally. So everything begins to go out of sync and carries an even greater risk. So when we can embrace experimentation, looking at things curiously, embracing how we can creatively solve a problem, and invite just a different perspective of how we're looking at the problems, sometimes the problems that we face every single day, every single hour of our working lives, that's where new results come from. We can't invent new solutions from the same level of thinking that created the problem. So that's I think a real driving force of what we're doing at CultureOS, and I think why it will really be the one of the core functions that drives real change, and also help us to navigate that fear of uncertainty, because that's hard.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I totally agree, of course, with Alex, and I think also this is probably the part that is going to separate the rest, because if you experiment, if you talk about having curiosity and courage, but I also think you have to have a playful attitude to it, because creativity is connected to play. Play and creativity becomes innovation. But the thing is, if you don't have the safety and we create the environment, which we will, where people can do that and feel that this is an experimentation. It's not the ongoing business. So you have to be able to be in that safe spot for a while. And you also said one thing that is very, very important. Who are the different perspectives that is come up with this kind of experimentation? Because if I bring, this is where I see it's really interesting when you have cross borders, cross generation, cross perspectives around the challenge. And yeah, one of the ways we do is we have these games, but there are many methods, but you have to have different perspectives to kind of unleash the new ideas and experiment. And when I've seen this, and I'm sure Carl can also, there's something magical happen when people dare, you said courage, because most people are afraid of change, but there is nothing else but change. Everything is changing constantly. We know that. Yeah, but this time it's faster. So when we have these arenas, I think things will, and we will create them, the things will move much faster. And that one of the most crucial parts, I think, in being part of CultureOS, that we can create those arenas and those safe environments, but also playful. That's my take on it. Yeah. What do you say, Carl?
Yeah, I totally agree with what both of you have said. The most recent example I had of my own was when studying at Stanford. I usually mention that besides the 9 courses that I took, just collaborating, solving an issue or a challenge with people from 73 countries in the world, different religions, backgrounds, educations. It was really something that I got to practice a lot at trying to understand the other person's solution for solving the problem, and then just really going into, okay, so he's a technician, I'm an financial guy, he's Indian, I'm Swedish, he's a Buddhist, I don't know what I am, I'm not something, but I was raised in Christianity. So just getting all those perspectives and then realizing that what we came up with was thanks to the fact that we were from 5 different countries, 5 different backgrounds and educations, made the solution much better. And that's something that we constantly work with when I work with helping customers to get more innovative, that getting them to understand that you need to involve everyone in the company, everyone that is being affected by us changing something or developing something new. They need to get their inputs into it and see, because something that is great on one end of the company could be devastating to another part of the company. And that's why you need all those insights. And the more you can get, the better the solution gets. So yeah, definitely.
And Carl, given all the innovation work you've done over the years, I'm just going to bookend this question with one other perspective, if I can. Many leaders that we work with operate as if culture is a complicated problem with a known answer. And the reality is, David, you've alluded to this earlier, we are operating in a really complex environment with multivariate problems. And so the thought that there is a right answer and that right answer exists for different companies is a complete fallacy. We need to experiment because our context, our cultural context in a company is what really matters, and what works for company A may not work for company B. And so this idea of experimentation, the experiments might be the same, but the outcomes may be very different depending on the system that we're operating in. And so I think that's one of the reasons why experimentation is so critical as well.
Can I just add one final thing on this to close us off, is that I think it's important to not sort of demonize or make out the bad guy on senior leaders who are in these positions, who maybe have not had the time or the ability or the for a moment's lack of pressure to pay attention to something like this, because work is tough and it's hard to prioritize everything that you need to, especially when you're at that level, when you're in that role. And so, the good news here is that there's a way to realize a different approach. Like you said, culture is this, yeah, it's this thing that we can kind of, learn how to kind of make, or how to realign, I suppose, um, in a way that fits the people who are actually making the culture, making up the culture. The problem comes in when we have the performance theater piece, when it looks like we're changing things, but we're actually not. That's what we need to kind of really be paying attention to as the first step. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you said that, Sarah, and then when you also said, Alex, I'm going to tie into that because again, different perspectives. And from my working with leadership and management, it's like I totally agree with you, Alex. Of course, they are in their own bubble with all the results and everything they have to take care of. This, there's a lot of things, a lot of pressure sometimes. But there's also like how much do you create an environment when you listen? I mean, when new people get recruited, or where people, because I mean, I've been in that business as well. When you're recruiting business, how you're recruiting new people, how diverse are you in your mind when you're thinking about that? And also now we have this rapid AI technology, a new world almost emerging from me being a little bit in the older generation. And then I come to think, and what about then what are we hearing from Gen Z? Because they are entering the workspace right now. And I'm asking you, Carl, when it comes to Gen Z, when they're entering today's workplace, um, what do we hear from them? How do they get accepted with their new ideas? And is it really high in the roof, like they always say in Sweden, when we hire people? Or what do you think? Do we listen to them? Do we bring them in, their perspectives?
Well, if we're starting off what we hear from the Gen Zs, they are not as into the old traditional ladder that we used to have. Like I start in one place and then I move up the ladder. That's not how they want to see themselves in the future. Getting a job, they want to work somewhere where I can ultimately find out what's interesting for me at this point in time in life and then change to something else. It doesn't need to be up, it could be sideways or down, if you like, in the old-fashioned ways of looking at it. Just to be working with something that is meaningful to them. They're also really focused on mental health, like how do I feel mentally, or how would I feel starting to work at this company? Doing background checks with people they might know or someone they know that knows someone at that company in order to find out what's it really like. Do they take care of their employees to make them feel mentally well and happy about going to work? They're also really into the hybrid working environment. They want to be at the office every now and then, but not all the time, and maybe not even working remotely all the time. We see that they do want to be at the office every now and then. They're much more driven about purpose than prestige when it comes to work. So having a purposeful and meaningful work is much more important than getting that title that used to be what people were aiming for. They want a very conscious leadership, like that's not bossy, but rather conscious about how they feel and the work they put in, that they get what do you call that? Like they get
Recognition and acknowledgement. Yeah. Yeah.
for the work that they do. They're also really into comfort in the workplace, like having room where you can go and take a nap if you need to. Other things than what has normally been like a traditional office. There's more to it now than it used to be. And the way that they look at purpose means that they are more looking for an employer for life than to have a job for the rest of their lives. It's really into, they are really into like finding an employer that will provide for them, where you can actually change, going, like I said, not the ladder up, but just changing to what you feel would be most rewarding at the moment. And something that always comes up is, how good is this company at teaching me new stuff, investing in me on learning new stuff? Take AI, for instance, using that in a way that makes me more productive and growing as a person are something that is also really important.
If I could just jump and pick up on that last point that you've made, Carl. So shameless plug here. As part of this initiative, as you guys know, we're running these Gen Z Voices podcasts where we're asking same questions to Gen Z colleagues. And one example of what you've just said, Carl, came up in a conversation last week. So company has a policy that you cannot get remuneration from any other job, employer, gig, and that if you want to go and speak at a conference or do some work on the side, you have to get formal written permission from your line manager. And this young colleague's perspective was, I understand to a point, but what if what I'm doing is actually going to make me a better employee, or what if it's going to enhance the portfolio that I bring? And so this idea of seeing me as a whole person with different aspects of my life and different ambitions that I have, as opposed to singular ambition to become, the most senior person in the organization, I think is a really valuable lesson that sometimes companies, with their desire to control, are missing the boat from the perspective of Gen Zs.
Absolutely. Fully agree. Anyone else that wants to add something?
Alex.
I'm sitting here and I'm imagining there's a fifth person in the virtual studio here with us, who is, I've actually got a very specific person in mind, but I won't I won't out them. But in their late 50s, they are the founder. They're the founder of the business, but they're still the CEO of several thousand uh, employees, and they do work across the world. Very, very successful. Great customer track record. Large distributed workforce. Lots of young people in their workforce. And this person has, kind of comes with the esteem of knowing that they've worked for everything that they have, and that they have worked from the ground up, and that they've done it all themselves. It was all about hard work. It was all about, opportunities weren't given, they were taken, they were made, and all of that stuff. And I'm imagining what he would say and how he might think, and I think mistakenly think, that all of this is about us coming to the young people, hearing them out, and buying a bunch of bean bags and getting everyone feeling more comfortable and kumbaya and all of that stuff. Because it's so easy for what we're saying to kind of be pigeonholed into that, and that really is to misunderstand, I think, the fabric of what it takes to design and co-create a great functioning culture. Because we all have these generational stories. We all have these influences from our past, from who we are, where we grew up, the language we speak, all of these things that, and every generation I think has this, where it's like, I had it hard and I came through it. Now you might be having it hard. Why should you get any quarter? And so that's a lot of the time, I think, the conversation that we're inviting everyone, not just Gen Zs, not just boomers, whatever generation you come from, to be able to come, together at the table, to open up the dialogue and to be curious about where the dialogue potentially takes us. Because I think if we're curious, we are more likely to be surprised and find common ground, and perhaps get over the stories we're telling ourselves about the other generation, or, how they have it or how we think they have it. And I think that's the real key here. And that's, I think, what makes CultureOS quite different, because we really are kind of encouraging this roundtable approach to having perspectives heard and then working from there, rather than working from impressions that people have and how they walk around with stories in their head, which are helpful to no one.
Oh, Alex, can I just give a quick one on that, because it's such an important one? I think when you talk about narratives, mindsets, the way we see the world, different generations, you're onto the biggest of them all there. Because if I believe that this is the world because you grew up in that world, but if you're humble, if you're humble and listen to other people's perspectives, you can learn so much. And this, I think, is the key. Why you talked about courage, curiosity. Again, those two will open everything. But then again, courage means to, maybe you're smarter than me. Maybe you have more knowledge than me in this area. I love people that are younger, or, different perspectives. You can learn from you learn from everyone. You have children, you learn from your children, right? Alex, those are the best teachers, right? But this is also about being open-minded to learning, and want to explore, want to have young perspectives. I mean, because that can be challenging, of course. But if we, again, create that environment, which we're going to do, that's where the real magic is, I would say. Yeah.
Absolutely. And final question for David, talking about culture, but when leaders call culture for soft or fluffy, are they really saying that they don't buy that that it drives tangible business value, would you say?
Yeah, culture, structure, breakfast and everything. Let's just say that yes and no, depending on who the leaders are, of course. It's a very general question. But yeah, my experience is the more traditional company, the more traditional hierarchical company, they think it's fluffy. And you talked about posters, Sarah, and putting values. I also help them with values, and as a consultant going there. But do you walk the talk? And the reason why they think it's sometimes fluffy is because they don't understand that the most important value you have is your personal, and how well they thrive, how well they want to go to your work, not because you pay them, but they actually love to go to work because it's purposeful. That's your biggest asset. But this usually also is more mature leaders that work with themselves and maybe understand the new world. So you could say, I can't say that it's for everyone, because I also work with cultures, in some companies where they already know this. They want to have some people and culture people that really gives the culture, and then they buy in, good, not just beanbags, but actually good processes, and they give them everything. But here's the kicker: when leader calls that, it's usually, my experience, they don't want to transform themselves. They want to buy stuff, buy courses, buy things, so they don't have to change their mindsets. And then we bring us back to the last question, Alex, because if I don't have to change, I can just focus on the business and everything. They are usually from an economical background, leaders, CEOs, CFOs, and so forth. And of course, that's their reality. That's where they came from. But we're living in a new world now where relational capital, the way you listen and become creative, open up, create flow, so we can, move faster with not so much resistance in the hierarchical systems. Like I said in the beginning, depending on who you talk to, but I do think when you ask that kind of question, unfortunately, yes, because until they've seen the numbers, and of course there are a lot of good examples of that, but then you come to another thing: how good and how much time do they have to do, research about who are the pioneers in other part of the world when it comes to, it's connected. You can have, it's all connected. When you have the right type of culture, you attract the right type of talents, and then you can have them move from all the world, and then you can bring the best products. You can have a very good example of a Swedish company called Spotify. I know people from working inside there. It's not just to say that those are, but it's about, do you understand that the culture is the way you attract talents? Then you understand it's also about the numbers. If you don't understand how important culture is to attract the right talents, to keep them, meaning give them the right education, the right learning curve so they can get challenged and so forth. So the ones that understands that culture is the real magnet that also can show numbers, they get it. And I have met some of those, and I've met a lot more that maybe don't get it. So yeah, I guess that's part of our mission, to make them understand that the way of really being ahead of the game is to build a magnetic culture. So CultureOS, bringing it all together again, that's where it is. And if you have a culture, you can't really copy that because that's your blueprint. So yeah, it got me going there. But yeah.
I'd like to just talk very specifically about a business metric that a lot of companies care about, which is time to market. And I think you can, it's not, you don't need a PhD to figure out if you have low trust, so your collaboration OS is not optimized. So let's say you have the three of us, we have low trust. I make a decision, but then I need to meet with each of you for 1 hour to bring you on board with my decision. That's 3 hours that we've lost. That's 3 hours of drag. And then you multiply that across your organization, that impacts your time to market, which in turn impacts your revenue, which in turn impacts your profitability and so on. So I think, often culture's seen as soft and fluffy because it's not a line item on the financial statements, but there's not too many steps removed to be able to draw very clear examples about how it impacts financial statements. And I think one of our challenges, guys, I think is to try to make those links a lot clearer. And speed matters. We're in a hyper speedy world, and if someone can get to market quicker than us, that's competitive advantage. Carl.
Yeah, and I would say we actually lose 6 hours on that because you also have to spend 3 hours with each and one of us. So it's us.
Yes.
Now,
Maths was never my strong suit.
no, but that's just to make the point even stronger that we lose a lot of time. I would also say that those managers that would say that it's a fluffy and soft thing is because they have the wrong incentives model that you talked about, Sarah, in the beginning, and also the wrong KPIs. So they're chasing those KPIs that drives the next quarter, and that's that short-minded or short-sighted focus that makes them lose track of what's really important in the long run to build a sustainable business with a culture that helps you move along and adjust to everything that's going on at the moment, and just being adaptive. Sometimes when I talk about the future of leadership, I tend to take away the normal IQ measurement because it's it has its weak points anyway. But talk about business intelligence, like have you been around? Have you been in different businesses, different industries? And you rate yourself from 1 to 10. And then you have street smartness, like which is another kind of IQ, I would say. And then I do emotional intelligence. And the fourth layer would be spiritual intelligence. So if you rate yourself 1 to 10 and you get all 10s, you would get 10,000 points. And then I use myself as an example, and I end up at, because people tend to think that I'm kind to myself. I say I have an 8 in business smartness, or business smartness. Street smartness is always also an 8. That comes from all the gray hair. Intelligence, I would say that I'm a 7. and or even 8 maybe. And then spiritual, which is something that I've been developing the last couple of years, I end up at a 7. That sounds pretty high, and still I almost have 65% of room for improvement, ability to lead in the future. That tends to make some managers feel a bit uncomfortable in the room when they think about themselves in that perspective. And I usually lose them at spiritual intelligence. That's like, whoa, way over their heads.
But again, Carl, this is, you could say, holistic. It's more understanding. We can talk about quantum physics if you like. This is just words. But let's just say that the world is complex and we need to be more holistic in our way of understanding. And maybe if you're really good at building teams, you don't have to be both emotional. You have to be emotionally intelligent. Otherwise, you can't work with relational capital. That's the most important, I would say. But IQ, EQ, all these intelligences, they're going to work together. You said, Sarah, we need to not solve wicked problems, as it's called, which is complex problems where everything is interconnected. This demands a lot of intellectual capital. You have to really understand system theories and complexity. And let's just say that not everyone does, but maybe together we can find the solution. So I do think, again, open-mindedness, being willing to, if I work with someone that is so-called smarter than me in one of these intelligence, does that, how can I be cool with that and actually see that as a strength? Those are the new leaders, the ones that are not afraid of people that has other capabilities and maybe are smarter in some of these areas that you say, or even holistics. I understand all of this, but still I only have 24 hours a day. So you're into something very important there, I think. And I think also this is the way we lose it. People might lose themselves because they have this curriculum. I come from this background. You said street smartness. A lot of the people that I meet that drives business, they are not from street smartness. They haven't built a lot. They're not entrepreneurial. They're more like schooled, But let's just face it, there's nothing right and wrong. And we're here to help them to, build their own culture operating system. So, of course, we listen in and we adapt to it. But you're so on point, I think, when it comes to understanding different, you could say, talents, perspectives, skill sets, and then we need to collaborate. So thank you for that, Carl.
I love your example, Carl. For me, it just conjures up this concept of leakage, right? It doesn't sound like a lot when you say 8 out of 10, but if I got you right, there was 8, 8, 7, 7, right? So those points of leakage is your opportunity or your loss of competitive advantage. I think that's a really, the compounding effect is really substantial when you look at it like that.
Could I add one thing on this? It's a really important point, and I think it's a kind of a nuanced point, but at the same time, I think, and Carl, perhaps you've had some of the same conversations I've had, where you kind of go in using the S word, spiritual intelligence, and most people are just not going to be very receptive to that. And that's, I think, because we've got to be able to frame it correctly in terms of the outcomes and not what sounds like, being a Buddha on a high mountain, but rather framing it in terms of what good leadership looks like and good self-leadership and what are those skills. And it always comes down to your ability to listen, your ability to empathize, to be creative, to be curious, to ask questions. That's how I think, that's part of the toolkit of being able to build and to co-create that balanced level of intelligence so that the balanced culture internally can deliver what both the people need to stick around, to be there and to perform, and what the business needs, which is to ensure that they can keep up in a crazy, crazy world. So culture needs to be seen as a revenue center, not just a cost center, and I think that's because culture doesn't have to be expensive. It can pay for itself and then some. That's, I think, one of the big things that we're driving here with CultureOS.
Really good.
Is it worth mentioning where people can find out more, where they can get in touch, where they can take the first step, perhaps, in taking a bit of a deeper look at what we do and how it might be useful in terms of how they can begin to rethink some of their own patterns, some of their own elements in their culture internally.
Mm-hmm. So first place to start, culture-os.com. Here you can learn more about this movement that we're creating, and I think it really is a movement, right, guys? Is that this isn't a one size fits all, here's how you do it, paint by numbers. This is a community effort for getting to a better future of work. You can sign up and register for our newsletter there. And if you'd like to complete a questionnaire that gives you a feeling or an impression for strengths and development areas in your own organization, you can do that on the website too. What am I missing?
No, that's right. You heard it here, folks. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, and follow us on social media.
Oh, of course. Yep.
CultureOS.com on LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn, I would say. Go to LinkedIn.
And be part of the movement.
Yeah, join us.
Have fun.
Absolutely. Amandla.
It's always a pleasure to hang out, guys. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for today. Nice to see you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.